I'm very happy now to introduce someone who will be familiar to many of you, Professor Jonathan Boston. Jonathan is, of course, Professor of Policy Studies at Victoria University, Director of the Institute of Governance and Policy Studies, formerly, I think? Formerly, yes, and formerly Treasury, even. And Jonathan, to me, is one of those people, when I think of politicians, I'm always complaining about the professional politician, the sort of emergence of the profession of politics, which has sandpapered some of the moral mission and crusade of politics, I think. And so there's the professional politician and the conviction politician, the politicians that get things done. I think Jonathan Boston is not so much a professional academic as a conviction academic, and he gets things done and makes a difference. He has had a profound influence on our ability to understand the causes of poverty, child poverty, and what to do about it. So I'm extremely pleased to invite Jonathan Boston to say a few words to you today.
Well, morena, everyone. Ko Jonathan Boston aho. It's very hard to speak after some sort of introduction like that, isn't it? I wish I had had a bit more impact on some things, but we keep trying. So, first of all, just to build on what Murray has said, like many of you here today, I and my wife were deeply shocked by what has happened at Loafers Lodge, just down the road from where we live a few days ago. I know at least one of the people who died. I think he was a student of mine some years ago. And obviously, it's an absolutely tragic situation. And a key point is that we have tolerated in this country far too long poor standards of housing, as Murray has said, including poor standards of safety. And we just have to demand higher standards of health and safety, not least for our most vulnerable citizens. This is a kind of Grenfell moment for Wellington. Grenfell Tower, as many of you know, burnt some years ago with the death of 72 people. Well, we don't yet know how many will have died in the last few days, but it's a scar on this society, and we need to do something about it. Now, as I'm sure many of you would agree with, there are some excellent things in the budget, not least the scrapping of the $5 co-payment for prescriptions, the extending of the 20-hour free early childhood education subsidies to 2-year-olds, free public transport for children, and high half-price discounts for those aged 13 to 24. And as someone who teaches young people in a university, I'm delighted particularly about that last one, the half-price discounts. And there are lots of other good things in the budget. But obviously, Grant Robertson was faced with some very significant challenges in putting this budget together, as the Minister outlined earlier, and I won't bore you with those because you know. So let me just concentrate on 3 or 4 things very quickly. The first is this. It's really good that we have in our Public Finance Act a requirement for the government to produce a child poverty report in every budget, and that report outlines what is happening in terms of rates of child poverty and what impact the budget is expected to have on child poverty. And I think that's a terrific step forward because it increases accountability and transparency. And what it highlights is that this budget will have a modest effect on at least one of the primary measures of poverty, but in all likelihood, another measure of poverty will probably go up over the next few years without further policy changes, and that's disappointing. We don't know exactly what the impact will be on material hardship for children, but what we do know, and Murray knows a lot more about this than I, is we have some very significant material hardship in this country and here in Wellington. So although there have been improvements on the basis of all the primary and supplementary measures, or most of them, over the last 3 or 4 years as a result of the government's policy changes, which I commend, although there has been some improvement in poverty rates for children, for families, a lot more needs to be done. And in that regard, it seems to me that we need to move, frankly, beyond just a focus on children or family poverty and think about other groups, in particular 18 to 24-year-olds, where poverty rates went up very, very significantly in the 90s and have remained quite high ever since. So one of my policy proposals would be that we extend the requirement for government to set targets for child poverty to other other age groups over the coming years. In addition, and this is really important for children looking forward, is that we not only have a requirement for the government to produce a report on the impact of the budget on child poverty, but also a requirement for the government to produce a report of the impact of the budget on environmental outcomes, including the key kind of environmental outcomes, such as greenhouse gas emissions, freshwater quality, biodiversity, and so forth. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is we need much greater specificity, accountability, and transparency. Next point is that while it's great that the current government is committed to a more inclusive, resilient, sustainable, and prosperous society and economy, in my view, and I think others would share this, we need greater ambition and more urgency, as Murray has indicated, and a broader range of goals. And in my view, just very quickly, in addition to be concerned about poverty, we need a very specific objective of reducing income and wealth inequality, and especially ethnic inequality in terms of income and wealth. And to be specific, we need to target particular measures of income and wealth inequality, such as the Gini coefficient for income and for wealth. And we need to set, in my view, societal targets for reducing the levels of inequality in those respects. And I appreciate, partly, I don't think any country has done this, but it's about time we did, because we've had a very significant increase in inequality, or at least we did several decades ago, and that has remained the case. Next point is we need to set some very ambitious goals for housing, as Murray has indicated. And in my view, that means, amongst other things, a goal of at least doubling the size of our current social housing stock, which is now only about 4% of total housing stock in the country. We need to get back to where we were 40 years ago, when it was 7%, if not higher. And in my view, unless we do that, and a lot of other things about which Charles knows more than I, a lot more, we are not going to address the kind of housing challenges we have. We also, in my view, need to be ambitious about returning to higher rates of home ownership in general, but also particularly for Māori and Pacifica. Bear in mind, in this country, most Māori and Pacifica rent accommodation, and an awful lot of them rent from Pākehā. I just don't think that should be accepted. So we should set ambitious targets for increasing home ownership rates. Finally, and I'll finish now, Josie, how do we achieve these sorts of things? Well, with difficulty, no question. The policy changes required to reduce inequality, address the housing challenges we have, reduce poverty further, they will require significant policy shifts. Things like a more progressive income tax, a comprehensive capital gains tax or a land tax, significantly higher carbon prices with a just transition with significant changes in tax sort of welfare arrangements, including working for families, which was mentioned earlier. And selling those policies, I appreciate, is challenging, but we need to do the selling. So I'll leave you there, all right? Cheers.